Hello and welcome to Kloeker's Education Foundation, where we provide quality content for amazing teachers and students. Now, if you're joining us from a previous video or channel, welcome back. And if this is your first time, we're glad you're here. This is our U.S. government series, and this lesson is on the foundations of government. Before we begin, don't forget to check out the link in the descriptions below to resources on Teachers Pay Teachers, or a set of free guided notes linked in the description below. Let's dive in. Imagine a society that did not have a government. What would that look like in your opinion? How would the people act? If someone took something that wasn't theirs, I took your phone, who would enforce consequences? Now, you might be thinking, what is government? Government is the institution through which a society makes and enforces its public policies. Now, there are some terms we'll refer to throughout this series, one of them being the state. The state can be defined as having four characteristics: population, territory, sovereignty, and government. For population, a state must have people, the number of which does not directly relate to its existence. A state must be comprised of land, territory known and recognized within its boundaries. Every state is sovereign, independent. It has supreme and absolute power within its own territory and decides its own foreign and domestic policies. And every state has a government that is politically organized. There are some hypotheses and theories as to how the state originated. Four of them, which we're going to talk about briefly. The force theory. The force theory states that one person or a small group took control of an area and forced everyone within to submit to that person or that group's rule. The evolutionary theory states that the state evolved naturally out of an early family, very often a patriarchy. The divine right theory, which holds that God granted the state and that God gives those of royal birth a divine right to rule. And social contract. The social contract theory argues that the state arose out of a voluntary act of free people. Regardless of which theory is used to establish the state, government serves an ultimate purpose. And in the United States, the purpose of our government is listed in the preamble of our Constitution, and it goes like this: We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Now, let's break this down piece by piece. We, the people, that means everyone, all of us. Now, there's going to be people who say historically the U.S. did not mean everyone when they said we, the people. And this is true. It started off as white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men. And that definition and that classification of we, the people, has increased over time. First, it was Catholics. And then we had the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. Then women were included with the 19th Amendment, and we had the Civil Rights Movement to expand the definition of we the people. Now, in order to form a more perfect union is pretty significant. We recognize that in the United States, we are not a perfect nation. We will never be. We will never achieve perfection. But we can take steps to get closer to what perfection means, to what perfection is. Now, in order to be better, in order to try and achieve as close to perfection as we can, we will establish justice, a court system, laws that work for everyone, not just the few. Ensure domestic tranquility. Make sure that the home front is calm, that there is no revolts, revolutions, and insurrections. Peace among the domestics. Provide for the common defense. We take this to mean our military, our Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, providing for the defense of everyone within the nation. Promote the general welfare. Of course, this means we're looking out for those within our nation. We have programs like food stamps, Social Security, which look out for the general welfare of the people. And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Now, posterity is kind of an old-timey word. It's kind of a big word we might not know. It means our children, the future generations. So in order to ensure the blessings that we have, we are going to make sure we do all of these things, not just for us, but for our children and our future generations, so they too can harvest the blessings of liberty. And then we get into our Constitution. And if you want a more entertaining version, you can check out the Schoolhouse Rock song. I don't have rights to that, so I'm not going to link it, but you can Google Schoolhouse Rock, the preamble. Governments can be classified by 3 different standards. Number 1, who can participate in the governing process. 2, the geographical distribution of the governmental power within the state. And 3, the relationship between the legislative branch or the lawmaking branch and the executive branch, which executes the laws. So who can participate in government? In a democracy, supreme political authority rests with the people. And a direct democracy exists where the will of the people is directly translated into the law. In an indirect democracy, a small group of people chosen by the people will act as their representatives and express their popular will. Now, a direct democracy means that when a law is put up for the ballot, everyone in the nation votes on that law. So there's a referendum. In a representative democracy, also known as a republic, we elect a small group of people. We choose a small group of people, and they go to the seats of power, to government, and they represent us and express the popular will. We vote through them. In a dictatorship exists where those rules cannot be held responsible to the will of the people. This means that there is an autocracy where the government has a single person having unlimited power, or an oligarchy where a government is ruled by a small group of usually self-appointed elites. Governments can also be classified by the geographical distribution of power. This is not physically where on the map is the seat of government. This is how it is laid out. So a unitary government means all powers are held by a single central agency, one unit, one united government. A confederate government, a confederation, is an alliance of independent states, very similar to the Articles of Confederation, which was our first governing body, and every state had a firm league of friendship that tied them to the next. And then there is a federal government. A federal government is one in which the powers of the government are divided between a central government and several local governments. An authority superior to both the central and the local governments made the division of power on a geographical basis. There are 2 major relationships between legislative and executive branches that we see in modern governments. That is a presidential government and a parliamentary government. Now, in a presidential relationship, voters elect the legislative branch and the chief executive branch, who is leading the executive branch. He'll have his cabinet members. And the legislative and executive branch are independent, and they are equal. Now, in a parliamentary relationship, voters elect the legislature, and then the legislature will choose the chief executive amongst them. We see this in places like England and Canada. Now we have this chart, as you can see, of some different countries. So, for example, in Botswana, Costa Rica, Cuba, France, there's a unitary government where there's one branch of government. However, in Brazil, India, and the United States, there are multiple branches of government. You can see the breakdown between which countries have a parliamentary government, where the legislature choose the executive branch, and a presidential, where the people elect the legislative branch and the executive branch separately. And then, of course, who can participate in a democracy, where the will of the people is answered for, and then a dictatorship, where one person or a small group runs the nation and is not responsible to the will of the people. Now, I do want to note Syria has had some recent government changes, and so their government is currently being reformed, and that may change this chart in the future. Now, for American government, the American concept of democracy based on these basic notions. 1. The fundamental worth and dignity of every person. 2. A respect for the equality of all persons. 3. A faith in majority rule and an insistence upon minority rights, where their rights will not be trampled by the will or rule of the majority. 4. The acceptance on the necessity of compromise. And 5. The insistence upon the widest possible degree of individual freedom. We want to let people have the most freedom as possible. Now, democracy and the free enterprise system usually go hand in hand together. The free enterprise system is an economic system characterized by private or corporate owners of capital investments and are determined by private decision rather than by state control or determined in the free market. You can check out the link below for the link to our free enterprise PowerPoint and lesson from our Intro to Business class. Decisions in free enterprise are ultimately determined in the law of supply and demand. You'll see that link below on your screen. You can click that if you want to check that out and hear more. And the economy of which private enterprise exists is a combination of considerable amounts of government regulation and promotion, where there's a mixed economy. Now, compared to a traditional and a market economy, which is also, you can see on your screen, linked below. You can click that if you want to hear more about that from our Intro to Business series. Now, comparing the American government to how it started with the English. Now, the English colonists brought these concepts over to the New World back in 1607 with the creation of Jamestown. Now, the need for an ordered social system and government, the idea of limited government, that is, the government should not be an all-powerful government, and the concept of a representative government, where a government serves the will of the people rather than the few. Now, this comes from several documents that have developed through the English government. So, the Magna Carta, which was handed to King John in 1215 at Runnymede, where the British nobles gave him a list of rights that he was going to sign. Among these was limited taxation. In 1689, we see the English Bill of Rights expanding those rights to more people. And the Virginia Bill of Rights, written by the colonists who still considered themselves English citizens at the start of our American Revolution. And you can see the timeline, right? Magna Carta, rights like trial by jury, due process, private property, again, limited taxation. In 1689, they reaffirmed these rights. They also add in the no cruel punishment or excessive bails or fines, the right to bear arms, the right to petition, and the Virginia Bill of Rights in 1776, where we again add more unreasonable searches and seizures, the right for freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom of religion, and all these are accumulated in 1791 when we pass our Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. outlining individual rights for every person in the United States. So to give a brief history, right, the 13 colonies, there were 3 types of colonies established by the English when they came to the New World: royal, proprietary, and charter colonies. Now, royal colonies are ruled directly by the king. A proprietary colony is where he granted land to the people and they formed a self-governing. And then a charter is mostly self-governed and the charters were granted to the colonist. Up until the mid-1700s, colonists were allowed a great deal of freedom by the English monarchy. However, in 1760, King George III imposed new taxes and laws on the colonists as a way to pay for the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, depending on how you want to call it. And the colonists, of course, started to propose an annual Congress and begin to rebel and resent all of the taxes. One of the first resistance was the Stamp Act, right? In 1765, a group of colonies sent delegates to the Stamp Act Congress in New York, and they prepared a list of rights and grievances, a declaration of rights and grievances, and they sent it to the king saying this is what they were unhappy about. Resistance continued. We see the First Continental Congress, where colonists sent a declaration of rights and grievances to the king. They refused or encouraged colonists to refuse all trade with England until the taxes and regulations were repealed. And then in 1775, each of the colonies sent representatives to Philadelphia in the Second Continental Congress, and this serves as our first governmental body in the U.S. from 76 to 81. Throughout the length and duration of the American Revolution. On July 4th, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, and between 1776 and 77, most states adopted their own state constitution outlining their laws, their purposes of government, instead of their charters by the king. Now, our first form of government was known as the Articles of Confederation. Each state was considered independent and they were in a firm league of friendship with each other. Congress was given powers such as the power to declare war, deal with national finance issues, and settle disputes among the states. And the states promised to obey Congress, respect the laws of the other states, but most powers were retained by each individual state. Now, there were many weaknesses within the Articles of Confederation. For example, each state had one vote regardless of size or population. Congress could not collect taxes or duties. They couldn't regulate foreign trade. They could not enforce any laws. There was no national court system. And then, of course, to pass an amendment required the consent of all states and a 9/13 majority, which is more than a 50% majority for those of you that struggle with math. But the Articles only had a firm league of friendship, and so there were lots of issues with this governing body. All of these weaknesses led for a call for a stronger government, and so Virginia and Maryland got together in 85 to discuss trade issues, and it went so well they requested all 13 states to come together, and this eventually became the Constitutional Convention that happened in Philadelphia. Now, the Constitutional Convention was originally supposed to resolve the issues where they were just going to alter the Articles of Confederation, but it turned into they were going to draft an entirely new government. And so different plans popped up in this discussion. The Virginia plan, which outlined 3 branches of government, a bicameral legislature, so there was 2 houses within the legislative branch. There was a national executive and a national judiciary. Now comparing that to the New Jersey plan, where there was a unicameral Congress, equal representation for states of different sizes and population, and there was more than one federal executive in the government. There were, of course, major issues in this convention, and again, one of the fundamental concepts of our government is compromise, and so three major compromises came out of the Constitutional Convention. Number one, the Connecticut Compromise. Delegates agreed to a bicameral Congress where there would be one house based off of equal representation for every state, regardless of size or population. That's the Senate, and a house solely based off of the state's population. That would be the House of Representatives. Now, this led to a major debate between the southern states, which had the institution of slavery, and many of the northern states, which were abolishing slavery or had already gotten rid of it. Now, this was the Three-Fifths Compromise. How do you include the slave population in the states? The southern states wanted to count them as individuals, but not grant them full rights. This, of course, was not acceptable to the North, and so the Three-Fifths Compromise was born, where they decided to count a slave as 3/5 of a person when determining the population of a state. And so southern states had a larger representation in government because they could count the slave population without giving them any rights. And then there was a commerce and slave trade compromise, where Congress was forbidden on taxing exported goods, which would help the North, and was not allowed to act or regulate the slave trade for 20 years. Now, there are influences that happen. You can check out our stations activity if you want to talk about the framers and the influences. So framers are, of course, influenced by the Enlightenment. Ideas such as Jean Rousseau and John Locke, they're going to influence the writing of the government. Okay, they're seasoned veterans by the Second Continental Congress. Most of them had participated in the Articles of Confederation or their own state governments. And so, when the Constitution was completed, the framers, some of them were incredibly happy, some of them were disappointed, like George Mason of Virginia, who opposed it until he died, although most agreed with Ben Franklin's thoughts when he said this: "From such an assembly of fallible men, can a perfect production be expected? It astonishes me, sir, to find the system approaching so near to perfection as it does. We sent all of these flawed men to make our government, and they came up with as close to perfection as they physically could." Now, after the passage of our Constitution, some argue that the federal government was too strong, and some said it wasn't strong enough. Very controversial. Those that wanted a stronger federal government, the Federalists, thought the Articles of Confederation were weak and argued that this Constitution needed to be passed and ratified. Those that thought it created too strong of a federal government were known as the Anti-Federalists, because again, it's a federal government, the Anti-Federalist. They object to the Constitution for many reasons, including the fact that it had a strong central government and lacked a Bill of Rights. They were concerned that they were creating a government with such power that it could abuse them, much like King George had abused them. And so they wanted a Bill of Rights to protect them as states and them as individuals from the federal government based off of the injustices of King George. Now, comparing Anti-Federalists, those that were against the federal government, mostly small farmers, shopkeepers, laborers. They wanted stronger state governments, a weaker national government. They wanted direct elections, so everyone votes and they choose those people. Shorter terms, they wanted rules for the common man and protect individual liberties. Now the Federalists, those who wanted stronger governments, large landowners, wealthy merchants, professionals. They wanted weaker state governments. They wanted a stronger national government. They wanted indirect elections, longer terms. They wanted the government to be ruled by the elite and the educated, and they had less concern for those individual liberties of the people. Now, this new government, Congress meets for the first time in 1789. Congress attained a quorum or a majority on April 6 and counted the electoral votes, and Congress found that George Washington had unanimously been elected president. Unanimously means everyone voted for him. No one voted against him. And so he was inaugurated as our president on April 30th. That wraps up our lesson, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check us out on Teachers Pay Teachers, YouTube, and Rumble, linked in the description below. Check out our next lesson on different political systems right there on your screen. That lesson is just a click away. I'll see you there.